Alright, so I originally wrote this script just 9 days after the release of Edge of Fate, but then I had a holiday to go on, so I am now getting around to editing this video almost 3 weeks later. In that time, I've actually seen a bit more positive buzz around the game. Don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of people who hate the arbitrary power grind, but once it's over, the game is quite rewarding in terms of tier 5s dropping. But the whole premise behind the system is flawed in my and a lot of other people's opinions. Getting the best loot to drop is not a matter of skill, but rather a boring, monotonous time sink that, once finally over, allows you to farm the loot that you actually want. And this is thanks to something I've said for a long time, that Bungie now develops the game for engagement rather than fun. But credit where due, Bungie recently launched the Solstice, which is the yearly summer event, and it has been received quite positively. Despite not even having an event mission like Bonfire Bash, it is still one of the most well-received limited time events I've seen in some time. The reason? Because Bungie is finally not being stingy. They are giving out tier 5 loot in the event, and on top of that, the weapons are bangers by all accounts. It's so funny, it really goes to show that when Bungie just lets players farm good loot, they're happy. They don't even need a special event. They just have to make enticing loot attainable and people will want to play. It's simultaneously hilarious and sad because some people have speculated that the loot drops were actually bugged because we are so used to being drip fed everything in Destiny 2. So when the developer actually rains solid loot onto players, they immediately get suspicious. The bar for Bungie is truly on the floor. The expectations are so low that when they do the bare minimum, they're praised. But to be honest, I enjoyed seeing people happy about Solstice. I haven't cared about Solstice in years because the loot sucked, I hated Bonfire Bash, but above all else, I live in Canada and we get nice weather for like 2 good months out of the year, so I just like to be outside in the summer and not grinding Destiny. But yeah, it was nice to see some positive sentiment around the game for a change. But that brings us into the topic of today's video, and that is how Destiny 2 is officially on death's door. Even with a super rewarding event like Solstice, which is dropping some of the best loot in the game for free, as in free-to-play players also have access to this, the player counts are still abysmal. I will be referring to Steam charts through this video, and to all the people who say they aren't representative of player population, just know you're stupid. These charts show clear trends and interests. So with the super rewarding Solstice event kicking off, Steam charts peaked around 75,000 players. Not bad, but I need to remind you, this is within the first month of a new expansion. In the first month of the final shape, the game had 123,000 average players. The second month of that expansion saw a 62,000 average and a peak of 100k. The launch of Edge of Fate barely peaked past 100k. And the numbers in the 2 months of Lightfall of all things were even better. As I update this script on August 9th, a Saturday, the game has a 24-hour peak of 54,000 players and has 45,000 playing at the time of writing. Not a dead game by any means, but for a time period when a huge new update just dropped, this is abysmal. And if you look at the numbers from August of 2024 on, it paints a really grim picture. The harsh reality is that longtime fans of the game are simply done.
To show this visually, so this was our weekly active users for Destiny 2 in the first few months. And for comparison, this is what Destiny 1 looked like. So far so good. But then this started happening. And this moment right here in February of 2018 was fucking terrifying. So this graph shows the trend of our weekly active users. And at the rate that we were shedding players, we did the math. I remember being in the meeting, we did the math. And if this continued for just 5 more weeks, we would run out of players. The entire population would be gone. And we were seriously looking at potentially being 1 month away from having to just close up shop on Destiny 2 altogether.
The final shape was the conclusion of a 10-year saga and people wanted off the treadmill, and they got off. Numerous content creators with big channels either pivoted away from D2 or quit content creation altogether. I've spoken with some of them and they just said that the time was right. And the ones who are around, their view counts are far lower than they used to be. Sure, some still get really good views that I would be elated to get, but if you reference it with that creator's similar videos for other time periods in D2's lifespan, they're definitely lower than they used to be. Interest in the game is just not there anymore, and in this video I will talk about that and also how I saw this coming, mainly because of my own comment sections on YouTube. I took screenshots of hundreds of comments from people saying why they quit and how they'll never be back, or they were waiting to see how Edge of Fate was before jumping in. You could see the sentiment everywhere, and now the numbers are proving that. And despite the huge overhaul Bungie has just given the game, it won't be enough to entice players back in. And that's even if the game was working as intended, which it really isn't. Basically, everything with the stat changes has been bugged. The stat values were inaccurate to what Bungie intended and said that they would be, and new content launching buggy has just been par for the course at this point. So to understand how we got here, we must first take a trip down memory lane to see where we came from. Back in October of 2023, Bungie laid off around 100 workers, or 8% of its staff. I remember this very well because I had just left my job to take a stab at making content full-time on Destiny 2, so this was a huge blow to my morale. Management had ruined my last job, so I left, and then pretty much within the same month, Bungie was laying off staff. One reason for this was missed revenue targets by a whopping 45% for Lightfall. This shit absolutely pisses me off. These bean counters and executives are so out of touch with reality. EA is out here thinking that Battlefield will sell 100 million copies, investment firms think GTA 6 is going to sell $7 billion in the first 60 fucking days. These numbers are so wildly out of touch with reality, it's sickening. So maybe Bungie missed its sales goals by 45%, but I'm confident in saying that those goals were way too high to begin with. Completely out of touch with reality. Funnily enough, Lightfall was its best-selling, or at least its most played expansion ever, at least via Steam charts. I'm sure the launch of D2 had a ton more players and so on, but you get the idea. Anyways, another thing happened around this time, and that was that Final Shape got delayed. While most of my clan was sad and annoyed, I was elated. Delays are great in any game. You get more polished content, and for me personally, it allowed me to grow my channel much more before the Final Shape launched. There was a long lull between seasonal releases, so I went ham on content, and my bet paid off. I made daily content all of 2024, and then Bungie launched into light in March and my channel took off. It was exhilarating. On top of that, I was loving playing the game. To this day, Onslaught is my favorite mode they've ever released. It was so much fun, and as a build crafter, I beat 50 waves on every character with every subclass just because I was having so much fun playing the game. My friends were all loving it too. It was just great times, truly. Some of my favorite times in gaming. I was playing every day and having a ball doing it. Things were going great, and then Bungie released Pantheon, another absolute banger. A raid boss gauntlet that got harder week over week. Oh, and Onslaught was dropping 12 meta weapons to get us ready for the battle with the Witness. Then, Bungie finally released a trailer for Final Shape, and holy shit, a new subclass. Prismatic, combining the power of all 5 subclasses into one. Again, as a build crafter, I was licking my chops. They also announced a new enemy faction, the Dread. The hype was real to say the least, and it's the most hyped I've ever been for D2. Final Shape launches, fucking banger. As someone who doesn't really care about the story, I thought it was wonderful and touching. I teared up when Cade said,
"You're my favorite. Don't ever forget that."
I have goosebumps right now typing it. Bungie had done it. Against the odds, they wrapped up a 10-year story saga as well as they could. Community sentiment was probably at an all-time high, and player populations were bumping through June and July. 10 days after Final Shape launched, we had the showdown with the Witness in the Salvation's Edge raid. That 10-day stretch leading up to the raid was probably the most fun I've had in gaming. It was electric. The game had so much to do and see and test. If I recall, there were no huge bugs. There was some stuff with killing all the Paleheart bosses for the Kvostov quest being a bit bugged. A few things here and there, but nothing too egregious. The game functioned properly. The Kvostov quest was grindy as hell, and I remember my chest wouldn't open. I tried for like 5 minutes, finally I went to make dinner, ate and cleaned up, and when I came back down, thank God, it opened. You had people unlocking all the fragments on Prismatic. There was just so much to explore and do. We got dual destiny, an exotic mission for exotic class items, another cool new thing that Bungie had just introduced with the Final Shape. And the raid, Bungie cooked. While I'm not a huge fan of repeat run-throughs of Salvation's Edge, I am a big fan of the day 1 contest experience, and that first or second run in general was awesome. So yeah, things were looking great. Final Shape appeared to be a success by every metric. It was well received by its community, it had good day 1 player numbers, and actually maintained its player count through June as well as July. But at the end of July, another round of layoffs. This time, 220 workers, 17% of the staff. Gut punch. It was shocking to hear of another round of layoffs after all the positivity the game had garnered. It seemed like D2 was doing better than ever, but seemingly it was not. I should also mention, in January of 2024, it was announced that game director Joe Blackburn was leaving Bungie, and at the end of June 2024, Katarina Macedo announced she too was departing, and Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy were also heading for the exit. So definitely some high-profile names making their departure. Bungie had promised post-expansion content in the form of 3 episodes, Echoes, Revenant, and Heresy. And while Echoes was pretty lackluster, that was expected because literally every season that launches alongside an expansion is lackluster. Even Forsaken, which was probably Destiny's best ever expansion and sort of launched the seasonal cadence, had Season of the Outlaw, which was meh. The best one was Season of the Risen that launched with Witch Queen in my opinion. But yeah, the point is this isn't abnormal, so we kind of gave Echoes a pass. So in October, episode Revenant released. We were strapped in for some fun with this one. Onslaught was set to make a return, we had a new tonic system for focusing weapons to chase, a new dungeon released in Vesper's Host, it had the first ever contest dungeon, and man, it was a doozy. My team finished top 60 and took close to 9 hours to beat it. It was tough, but very fun. Overall, the dungeon was great and it was a true test to solo flawless. The dungeon exotic was also the beloved Icebreaker from D1, and Bungie cooked with reprising this weapon. I was having a blast making stasis builds to pair with Icebreaker, and soloing GMs with it was a lot of fun thanks to its infinite ammo. But the cracks in the game were starting to show. After launch, there was a litany of bugs. The artifact mods weren't working at all like they were supposed to, and the tonic system was super chalked. It just didn't work properly at all. This was extremely annoying for me because I love testing this kind of stuff, but it was also really annoying to the player base. Another thing that caused a lot of uproar was this season you could not craft the seasonal weapons. I hated this. I really like crafting because it saves on vault space for me and because it's a deterministic grind. I didn't get the God Roll grenade launcher until episode Revenant was over, and that was after GLs were nerfed. Bungie also had this annoying 3-act episode format, so they would trickle feed you content every 6 weeks or so, and with the next act within an episode, you'd get a new row of artifact mods. I hate time gating, so I was no fan of this. They also released a new exotic mission for the Slayer's Fang, which I actually really liked. I still think this is a super fun exotic mission, but by and large, players did not like episode Revenant, which was quite disappointing because Bungie had billed episodes to be bigger than seasons. But in reality, all they had was more time gating to stretch out the player attention longer as players had less content to consume overall. Just a clever renaming by the marketing team to drum up hype. Revenant launched with a peak player count of almost 90,000 players on Steam, and by the end of the episode, there were only 36,000 players playing, me being one of them. I was trying to have a good time with the game, but the bugs were ruining my enjoyment. I didn't mention it, but even though Vesper's Host is a great dungeon, it was littered with bugs. So many issues for people trying to get the exotic catalyst for Icebreaker, the nuclear core deposit not working, the final boss not spawning in sometimes, costing many people solo flawless runs, Tether not working with the servitor boss. This took them over 4 months to fix, and the fix is actually worse than it would have been to just keep Tether disabled. The boss fight is designed to have 9 servitors, so it promotes AoE damage like Glacial Quake, but their so-called fix was to reduce the servitors to 5. But it seems they didn't adjust the health pool, so now AoE is less effective, but you still can't rely on single target weapons, so you now have the worst of both worlds. I praised this boss when the dungeon launched for its unique designs, but now it is one of the worst boss fights in the game. Anyways, player numbers were crazy low, only 18,000 players average on Steam for the month of January. It was dire. And as I mentioned, I was really fed up with the bugs and Bungie taking forever to fix artifact mods, tonic issues, and dungeon encounters. The game I had once loved was deteriorating and I was searching for answers. I'd always heard of the GDC talk by Justin Truman where he said not to over-deliver because it creates patterns within your player base, but I had never watched the whole presentation. I wanted to fully understand the context. So I watched the entire presentation and it was like the wool had been pulled from over my eyes. I saw everything with so much more clarity. Because I was such a diehard player, I had never stopped playing the game. I loved it in 2017, and even in the lulls of Curse of Osiris where Bungie almost went belly up, I was still logging in most days to play because I just enjoyed the game and I wanted to get better at it. But this keen knowledge I have of the game and how the game felt after every iteration over the years meant I could pinpoint when they were putting a lot of these developmental ideas into practice. I remember hating the grind in Season of Plunder. Red borders were super stingy and everything was hella time gated. But as I heard Justin speak, it all made sense. They were putting systems in place to keep players on a treadmill as much as possible. seasonal challenges to get you logging in week over week. Many of these were retroactive at the start, but then they became less so over time. They had added seals into the game way back in the day, and while the shadow seal was there to push you and give you a sense of achievement when you earned it, eventually it just became a boring, grindy checklist. No rewarding feeling for completing it, it was just do your chores and you will earn this seal. I remember they got rid of the unbroken seal and changed it to something else for comp, and they had a tier system to get you to Ascendant. When I read that whole TWID breaking down the new comp ladder, I knew right there and then it was just designed to be as grindy as possible. You could see it plain as day, and once it was implemented, I was proven right. Bungie also gives Bright Dust away towards the end of seasons to entice players to log back in, all for their precious weekly active user metrics. After making that video, I became extremely jaded. I could see Destiny for what it had become, a chore simulator designed to keep you logging in as much as possible in the hopes that you would spend money in the store. And one other thing that happened with that video is it popped the hell off. It got over 200,000 views, which is a lot for me. It's my second highest viewed video ever. And I read thousands of comments on that video of people who once loved Destiny but quit for one reason or another. A lot were because of sunsetting, which is when Bungie took away a ton of content that people paid for. You can't even play the campaigns from the first 2 years of this game. The Forsaken campaign was one of my all-time favorites, and it's now lost to time. As is the Tangled Shore, one of my favorite planets. Along with the Hollowed Lair Nightfall, where you fight the Fanatic, which is one of the best strikes they've ever made. All of those, gone. Point is, I read people's comments and a lot of people had a lot of enlightening things to say about why they no longer trust Bungie, and a lot of them are valid. Sure, some things were over the top, but it's the internet. But a lot of people just wanted to love Destiny, but couldn't because of who was behind the game. Anyways, the third episode was set to release on February 4th, and this one was called Heresy. This centered around the Hive, so it was sure to be a banger. Hive-focused content is truly just the best. Bungie had cooked up another contest dungeon, this time in Sundered Doctrine, and it's an excellent dungeon, even if I'm not a fan of the first encounter. We got our second contest dungeon, which wasn't as challenging as the first one, but it was still very fun. And then, as I like to do, I got right in there testing solo flawless strats so that I could make my solo flawless dungeon guide. Unfortunately, the second boss of that dungeon has weird hitboxes, so it was showing crit damage but not registering crits. This has a huge effect on the type of weapons that are effective on this boss, and it greatly affects how I like to play the game because I like to test things and teach people. But it's hard to teach what to use if you don't know when the encounter will be fixed. Turns out, 6 months later, it's apparently still not fixed. Who'd have thought? The Nether was a seasonal activity tied to episode Heresy, and it had roguelike elements, and it reduced your health regeneration. A lot of people loved this activity, but I truly hated it. I like Destiny to feel like Destiny, and having to grab orbs to heal was just not it for me. Also, I like to play Destiny to kill things. I love the sandbox and build crafting. So when I had to run and try to find enemies or trigger secrets to spawn bosses, again, I hated that, but that's just a personal thing. Don't get me wrong, I can see why people like it, but for my taste, I did not. As I said, I was a big onslaught guy. Give me waves of enemies over and over and let me slay the hell out. That's what appeals to me. But my personal issues with Nether aside, it also launched with a ton of balancing issues in regards to healing, with certain weapons like Crimson bypassing the reduced healing or perks like Unrelenting. Truly just horrible quality control. If I was working at Bungie and we designed an activity around reduced healing, I would know to test every healing perk and weapon in the game that has some type of healing interaction or perk. Again, since Revenant, you could just feel the quality of the game deteriorating. So after the shit show that was Revenant, now Heresy was launching pretty bugged, and it didn't take long for me to check out of the season. I was just done. They were releasing a poor quality product, so I was not going to care anymore. Heresy peaked at 77,000 players and held strong at 40,000 for the month of February. So its average players was actually higher than Revenant's launch month. And its Valley in June was higher than Revenant's Valley in January. So while I personally didn't like it, it seemed like the community liked it much more, which is to be expected because, like I said, the Hive are the best faction in Destiny, and Bungie releases their best seasonal work before an expansion to get people hyped. So I can't speak to bugs for the rest of the episode because I had stopped playing. I started a second channel and just started streaming variety, playing things like Monster Hunter Wilds, Astrobot, Sekiro, Clair Obscure, Expedition 33, and as time went on, I just didn't miss Destiny 2 at all. I knew they didn't care about the game anymore, and that they only cared about keeping their numbers up, so I just didn't want to give them the satisfaction of my playtime. Anyways, I was doing my own thing, and then Bungie announced Rite of the Nine, an event in a similar vein to Pantheon to get people excited before the next expansion. This one revolved around 3 dungeons: Spire of the Watcher, Ghost of the Deep, and Prophecy. It updated their loot pools and gave different difficulty modes. One of these modes was actually a teaching mode to help get less experienced players into the dungeons, and I think that's great. It also had an ultimatum mode for the sweats, which dropped extra good loot. But let's talk about that loot. See, in Heresy, they did have pretty awesome loot, and you could get shinies, a special variant that they released in Into the Light. They had double perks in Into the Light, but they also had adept versions with Heresy. So you could get a normal version, a shiny version, an adept version, or an adept shiny version. A super weird and convoluted system, and my cynical ass saw this for what it was and just said, yep, more retention bait. Oh damn, I got a god roll, but it isn't enhanced because it's not adept. It's just another way to manipulate their players. So back to Rite of the Nine, it had this same dogshit system, just to entice players to grind even more. And to spit in the face of the few players who were still around, they would only be tier 3s in the new weapon system coming in Edge of Fate. And to add insult to injury, the dungeons were on a 3-week rotation, so you could only do 1 dungeon every 3 weeks. They relented and went to a 2-week rotation and just upped the drops on the 2nd week, and everyone praised them. Yay, let's fondle Bungie's balls for fixing the mess that they created. I was just rolling my eyes. I wasn't even playing, but I thought, how low are the expectations of the community to praise this? What it should have been is all dungeons available week 1 from the start and go nuts for like the final 9 or 10 weeks of the season. But as I said, I made the video on Bungie's mindset to development, and they don't care about their players' enjoyment. They just want them logging in every week. It was a super shit thing to do, and the event itself, while decent, didn't hold a candle to Pantheon. Oh, and before all this went down, in April, Bungie had revealed Marathon, and the reception was lackluster as hell. They had an open beta weekend a couple weeks later, and let's just say people were not fans. So Bungie was tanking their game that already makes money for a game that is looking to be costing them a bunch of money. And then you had Rite of the Nine releasing in early May, and they pissed everyone off with their time-gating shenanigans, only to bend the knee a little bit to repair community morale. And then a couple weeks later, boom. Plagiarism will make me God. They got outed for stealing a ton of art assets from an artist on Twitter, and then followed up the controversy with one of the saddest developer live streams of all time. So yeah, not a good few months for old Bungo. I chimed in here and there, dunking on Marathon and calling them out for the Rite of the Nine fiasco, and then it was back to streaming and making content for my other channel. Up until the release of Edge of Fate, I truly was just totally checked out. But I did see some discourse on Twitter. From what I could tell, they had like 3 developer live streams, and they were all just basically rehashing the same talking points that they covered in their blog updates and twids. So again, cynical me thought, yeah, they just don't have any content to show off. Granted, they were doing a ton of systems overhaul changes to breathe life back into the grind, but I had no faith in this. However, I stayed quiet waiting for release. Turns out, release was a shit show. Launch day did not even peak over 100,000, but they did top 100,000 players on their raid release day. But this was about a third of the numbers from Lightfall and Final Shape, and the lowest ever for an expansion since they moved to Steam. And as I mentioned earlier, less than a month into the expansion, they're now averaging around 50,000 players a day. And I'm sure that these numbers are going to start declining rapidly over the next couple months. The raid team did cook with the raid, but the contest mode was the buggiest in history. Oh, and it was also littered with cheaters. But that's par for the course at this point though. I don't trust a single thing that Bungie puts out anymore. But honestly, none of this is even surprising. The writing was on the wall. Final Shape was their big finale. They're now just keeping the game on life support. The studio used to be solely dedicated to Destiny 2. So then you slash 8% of your staff in October of 2023 and then 17% of your staff in 2024. So you have 25% less staff than you did when making the Final Shape. And I know Marathon has been in development for a long time, but a launch of a new game is probably taking precedent in the studio. And there were reports that morale was absolutely tanked at the studio after the art theft controversy. So you just have way less staff working on the game than ever, and probably more inexperienced staff. As I mentioned, Joe and Katarina had left, but so did Chris Proctor, one of the best designers there. He worked on weapons for a long time, and his team cooked, and then he moved over to Sandbox, but he left at the start of 2025. He was my favorite developer at the studio just from seeing him on live streams and in podcasts and stuff, and he was a true talent. So yeah, just another big loss for Bungie. So for me, as someone who pays attention and has been following the news for the game's entire life cycle, what is happening now is just the inevitable conclusion from the decisions that Bungie management has made. They could have doubled down on Destiny and made a D3 instead of Marathon, dropped last gen support and brought these new Edge of Fate changes into a D3 and fully fleshed everything out. The portal is a barren wasteland. 90% of raids and dungeons are still old gear, so they aren't worth running because people want the new tiered weapons and armor. Most of the game is dead because they just don't have the support to update everything. And now, this is the result that you get. And on top of the lack of quantity of meaningful activities, the quality has been suffering since episode Revenant. This is the new normal. The system changes that they implemented in Edge of Fate are extremely underbaked, and they are designed solely for retention. I made countless videos going over all the bugs and pointless grinding and whatever else was wrong with the Edge of Fate expansion. But the most egregious change was the pointless power level. You have to grind power level just to unlock the best gear, rather than the hardest content rewarding the best gear. The freaking contest mode raid was dropping tier 1 loot, the lowest you can get. That is just shameful. I had said it was obvious to me that they designed around player retention back in January when I made that video, and I could pinpoint many examples, but they were sort of hidden in the shadows. With Edge of Fate, Bungie went full mask off and gave a big fuck you to its community. Players found the best activity to farm to get power level, and then they disabled it. They then found a cheese for more loot, disabled again. The grappler modifier, which Bungie showed off in pre-release hype videos, disabled because it's too efficient, I guess. I have also seen some discussion that there are not enough negative modifiers. So to get an A tier rating on an activity, you basically have to run locked loadout, no starting ammo, and no HUD. Again, the ideas are decent, but it's all underbaked. So even though they claim you have agency, you just end up running the same mission 1,000 times with the same boring modifiers to get an A tier rating. Sure, you can run other modifiers, but then you're willfully hamstringing yourself because now you won't be getting a high enough rating. The community has pretty much realized that they can't do certain missions or grind for tier 5 weapons and armor until the 3-month content update. So until Ash and Iron releases, it just proves my point that I always say, which is that it's best to wait to play Destiny. And I guess I should clarify, you can get tier 5 weapons and armor, but you have to go through like a 100-hour slog just to hit 450 power. And then the game just rains loot on you for being a good little soldier and powering through their bullshit level grind. Some hardcore players have already reached 450, but the design from Bungie was just to keep players on the treadmill till Ash and Iron comes out, then the pursuit of good weapons and armor can begin, rather than just letting people farm to their heart's content from the get-go when the expansion releases. And then, on top of all this, all that progression gets taken away in December with the launch of their next mini expansion, Renegades. Your player base is not that stupid. I may have been sounding the alarm bell earlier than most, but now the broader community is waking up to what a shitty system this is. This decision may get changed or reworked because people are not happy, so they may make some tweaks and adjustments and respond to player feedback and make the grind less grindy, but as it stands right now, that is how the system works. All this power grind that people are reluctantly slogging through will just be reverted in December. There is a mid-season content drop on September 9th, like I said, in Ash and Iron, which is hilarious because 3 days later, Borderlands 4 drops, baby. And I have a feeling that what little is left from the player base at that time isn't going to be too interested for too long. Sure, some are going to crank out the new content in a few days and get some tier 5 loot and level up, but Borderlands 4 is going to poach a ton of the player base that is interested in PvE and wants a game that actually lets you grind. And that could well be the final nail in Destiny's coffin. They will leave just like I did and see what a game that is actually fun and respects your time looks like, and that'll be it. As for the PvP players, Battlefield 6 is looking amazing, so that's probably going to poach some players. All that is going to be left is the diehard people who say that they will stick with the game till the servers go down. I've actually seen some comments from diehards that they are super unsatisfied with the Edge of Fate. Some people are giving Bungie a pass and saying, well, it's a new system, if the game is still bad with Renegades, then I'm out. This is honestly just sad. Bungie has shown us who they are for a while now, and they have thrived for years off the promise of the future, that things will get better. Yet, since the final shape, things have only gotten worse. So if you're holding out for Renegades to fix the game, I have some bad news for you. Bungie has treated their player base like shit for too long, and now the karma is finally coming to bite them in the ass. So again, it really paid off that I waited to make this video because Sony, who bought Bungie in 2022, recently announced that Bungie's independence will be dwindling and that they will become more incorporated with Sony. How this affects the game's future is anyone's guess, but honestly, it can't get much worse, so maybe this will be a good thing. Time will tell. And I feel that I should clarify that this is about the end of Destiny 2, not necessarily the whole IP. The Destiny universe is truly incredible. There's so much lore and potential. They could make movie franchises or TV shows. Hell, Destiny Rising has over 5 million pre-registrations. A mobile game. That's insane. There's clearly a lot of interest in this IP. People still love the universe, which almost makes this whole situation even more sad. Bungie is sitting on a gold mine, and instead of allowing it to flourish, they went the lazy route and tried to deliver a minimum viable product for far too long, until people just got fed up and left the game. Destiny Rising is a mobile game, and it has a testing ground at launch, and they recently announced that they have Sparrow Racing as well, something D1 OGs talk about to this day. Again, the potential for this game is unlimited, but Bungie just keeps wanting to fumble it. Regardless, the Bungie of old is long gone, which is a huge reason that this is the end for Destiny 2. The writing is on the wall. Bungie is milking what's left of the player base and letting the game just limp along to a sad, pathetic death. For me, this is my last video on the topic for a while until they do some other stupid, egregious shit that I will dunk on them for, or maybe I'll just stop caring altogether, and then in 2026 when Bungie is dissolved by Sony, I'll just make an I told you so video. Funnily enough, that line I wrote a couple weeks ago when I originally did the script, and like I just showed, there's already a headline saying that that's already in the works. If you made it this far, you're a real one. If you're still playing the game, honestly, it's in your best interest to just stop, unless you are truly having fun. But if you are just on the treadmill jumping through Bungie's hoops, then trust me, it's worth stopping. I don't miss playing the game at all, and I was as diehard as they come. I've enjoyed so many better games, and I'm excited to play a bunch more better games in the future. Bungie does not deserve your time or money. I guess it's true what people said for years. The only Destiny killer will be Bungie themselves. Anyways, that's it. Join my Discord, come watch me on Twitch, thanks to my channel members, all that. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.